Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us at our first drone claim session for this quarter. Very excited to be part of this. I'm just going to do the introductions. So first, we have our preferred loss adjusters on the panel, McLarens Aviation. Now, McLarens is a world-leading provider in insurance claims, services, risk assessment, liability, and legal services from a global perspective. And we are very fortunate to have a branch of McLarens in South Africa. We've partnered with them from the day one, and I can honestly say the services has been professional and up to standard each and every time. The speakers, we have Dji Smit. He joined McLarens Aviation in April 2015, and he was before that a South African. He worked for South African Airways. He's a technical guru. He's able to declare big planes from A319s to B737s worthy to airworthy, as I understand. So Dji really knows what he's talking about, and he specializes in all forms of aviation, from the smallest drone up to the biggest commercial airliner.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Dji. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you, Willie.
Lara Vivier joined McLarens as a technical assistant in 2019. Lara holds a valid pilot's license since 2015, and she has a keen interest in helicopters and drones. Her work at McLarens, she's now becoming very, very proficient in assisting with the drone appointments, and she's been recently promoted as the leading drone surveyor within McLarens. So congratulations, Lara. And,
thanks, Willie.
Yeah, looking forward to what you have to say. Lastly, Lara, in addition, Lara's experience in helicopter emergency medical services and in general has been beneficial to the claims and the work that she carries out for us. Then last but certainly not least is our claim specialist, Nhlanzeko Mngomezulu. Zeku, as we call him, started with us in 2017. He's currently studying towards a higher certificate. And if I can say one thing about Nhlanzeko, he's got an eye for attention to detail. He's our specialist in the art department as well as the drone department, and nothing escapes his hawk eye. So thank you for your work, Nhlanzeko, and good luck with the presentation. Last aspect, between Ferguson and Tove and the presenters, they will ask some questions. We have 5 books to give away, called the Drone Professional 2. This is where 21 drone professionals provide their best thinking with regards to drone technology, best practice in the business, and also business tips from a commercial point of view. So it's a very handy book and very good read. So please stay tuned, answer the questions, and hopefully you can win a book. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Can everyone see the screen? Can you just give me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Welcome to everyone to our drones claims scenario. So what I'll be doing is giving just a brief overview of what the current iTOO policy covers. If this is not your first time on the call, you've probably seen the other ones where more in depth Greg and Kopano sort of discuss the covers. So I'll be just giving a summary of this. If you haven't seen it before, you could go to our YouTube page on iTOO and just look for that. I think it was sometime early this year and late in September also last year. So you can just get a good brief from that. Okay, let's see if these slides work. So a brief overview on what the iTOO UAV policy covers. There's 3 sections to that policy. The first section mainly covers any physical loss or damage that happens to the UAV, or basically the drone, and anything that is then a payload to it, which is a detachable payload or a non-detachable payload. So anything that is a payload, it could be cameras, anything that you can just attach to the drone and then be used in harmony with the drone. An example of that would be scanners, cameras. Human beings, no, you can't attach them to a drone. Section 2 then covers spares for these UAVs. So spares are anything that is needed for the drone to operate, but is a spare part waiting on the side whilst that drone is still using other parts. So for example, your batteries, your rotors, you have a section 2 to cover that as a spare, which is on the ground cover against any loss or theft or damage to it. Then section 3 is legal liability to third parties. And in this section, the liability that we cover is for any damage that happens to property or physical bodily injury. Goes also on to noise and privacy coverage. So that is just the brief of these 3 covers, or these 3 sections, which are the main sections to the policy. Then there's also extensions to the policy. So the first one that you have is war, or how war. This seeks to cover any malicious damage that might happen due to acts of sabotage, raids, strikes. So for example, in the recent strikes that we had in July, if your client had this policy and their premises were looted, they would be able to have cover under this. Because this is an aviation policy, fortunately you can't seek that cover with SASHIA, but this policy would be able to extend to that. Then you have operators indemnity that is able to cover the operators. There's cyber liability. This is sort of to address the issue. So for example, if you have a drone that was capturing some data and then due to a physical damage and accident, that data is now gone, and you need to, or your client needs to recoup that data or have another run of it, and the expenses that come from that, they can be able to tap into this part of the policy. And then liability to the operators. So these are just a brief of the covers that we have on the policy, but for more in-depth one, then we'll refer you just to that iToO, which was done by Greg and Kopano, where they sort of go into depth of these covers. Now I'll hand over to Lara and Dieter, who will give us a brief overview on global trends that they're seeing, what the market is looking like, and then towards the end, we'll have a few case scenarios that we'll discuss with them. Over to you, Lara.
Thanks, Seku. All right. Hi, everyone. Okay, let's go. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. All right, so over here, we're just going to look at just a quick definition of basically what a UAV is. So from this, we'll obviously see a UAV is an aircraft without any crew or passengers on board the aircraft, as they would call it. And then it just says UAVs are a component of unmanned aircraft systems, which include a ground-based controller and a system of communications via the UAV. And then also there's numerous designations and names such as, UAVs, which we said unmanned aerial vehicles, UAS unmanned aircraft systems, we've got drones, we've got RPAS, we've got remotely piloted vehicles. So there's many different words, and it's all the same. However, it just depends from person to person what they would prefer to call it, but the most widely used one would be a UAV. So for the sake of the presentation, we are just going to stick with UAV. Right, so now let's just have a look at the system description. So over here, we've just got a little bit of a diagram just to show how everything interacts with each other. The ground control station via links communicates to satellites, to the UAV, and then back to the operator and vice versa. Right, so good. Next one. Okay, so the size of the UAV, so you can see that the sizes vary enormously. So from the smallest drones that you can get, which you can hold in your hand, okay, on to the next one, show them. Right, from that small onto the big aircraft looking types of drones, which are still UAVs, believe it or not. There we go. So we can see just the difference in size, and like we said, it can vary enormously. Okay, on to the next one. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So which UAV manufacturer has the largest market share in commercial drones? Does anyone know? DJI, yes, that is correct. So let's see, Margaret, there we go. Okay, great stuff. And do we perhaps know the percentage of the market share? Okay, all right, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so let's have a look at just some manufacturers we've got here. We've got DJI, SenseFly, LTUAS, Parrot, Dragonfly, 3D Robotics, Micro Multicopter, Aerialtronics, Precision Hawk, and many more companies that are less well known. However, they are a big list of commercial drones. However, DJI would be the biggest manufacturer that we've dealt with, as well as SenseFly. Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so here's just a few examples of the different types of drones and different manufacturers. So over here, we've got the DJI Mavic 2 Pro, and that's just a brief look at what that drone would look like. And then we've got the SenseFly EBX, just a quick example of that. So there again, we can see different shapes, different sizes, different materials used for these drones. And then we've got the DJI Agras T16, which is a crop spraying drone. Again, varies in size, looks, everything like that. So there's just a few different examples of the drones that you would get, as well as the Multi-Transition drone, which is the fixed wing Vtol drone. And again, we can see how big that drone is. All right. Okay, so over here, we've just got a quick video of the different types of UAVs, which I will just ask Seku to play, and then we'll just have a look at that.
Drone types. The drone industry has really taken off over the past decade. From racing drones and hobbyist options to delivery drones and more commercial uses, many of us are finding reasons to love these mainstream convenience boosters. To learn more, let's dive into the video. Number 1. Multi-Rotor Drones. If you've seen small drones in your local park, they're likely multi-rotor models. These designs have several fans above their compact body. The multiple propellers create powerful lift and give the pilot precise control. Number 2. Fixed-wing drones. As their name suggests, fixed-wing drones look more like conventional planes, requiring a runway or a catapult to launch. They don't have vertical takeoff ability like quadcopters and single-rotor drones, and this unmanned aircraft system can't hover. Number 3. Single-rotor helicopter drones. These helicopter-style drones combine the best attributes of tiny, multi-rotor devices and large, single-wing units. Their reliance on rotors helps these devices hover and launch vertically. They tend to be larger than their tiny counterparts, suiting them to carry larger payloads. The lack of multiple motors makes them more efficient than multi-rotor models. Number 4. Fixed-wing hybrid VTOL drones. Fixed-wing hybrid models are the newest drone technology to launch into the marketplace. They combine the long range and flight time of fixed-wing drones with the vertical takeoff ability of a rotor-based device. That versatility makes this hybrid hardware a great choice for commercial drone use. Some companies are already using these models for its delivery purposes. Number 5. Small drones. As opposed to the first 4 drone types listed here, all of which can easily cost tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. These tend to only cost up to around $100. Small in this context typically means between 20 and 80 inches long. Number 6. Micro drones. While smaller drones may mean recreation in the eyes of consumers, for militaries who use drones, micro drones are all business. The most well-known example of this type of drone in action today is the Black Hornet, manufactured for the British military. Number 7. Tactical drones. These types of drones are often used for surveillance work. As with the Black Hornets, the Ravens are capable of being outfitted with special infrared cameras, helping them supply soldiers with an accurate picture of the area even in the nighttime. Number 8. Large combat drones. Chances are when you think of drones in a military sense, these are the types you imagine. Variants such as the Predator and Reaper, used by the US, are around 36 feet long and able to fire on targets with air-to-surface missiles and laser-guided bombs.
Okay, so from that we can just see that there are various types of drones as well, and they are actually just getting more and more advanced technologically, which is a great thing for all of us. So there we go. So onto the UAV market. So first of all, South Africa is the largest drone market in Africa. And we're just going to have a look at a few statistics just to give a little bit of context. So globally, the overall UAV market is estimated to be USD 27.4 billion in 2021, and it's projected to reach USD 58.4 billion by 2026 at a compound annual rate of 16.4%, which is enormous. So then just to give a bit of background with that, so the UAV market is classified into various segments, which are military, commercial, government and law enforcement, and consumer segments. So the military segment is projected to grow from 12.760 million in 2021 to USD 19.641 million by 2026 at a CAGR, which is that compound annual growth rate of 9%. And then the commercial segment, which was actually the highest CAGR of 28.0%, which is expected in that forecast period from 2021 to 2026. All right, and then just on to the next one, Zeku. All right, and then the payload segment we've got as well, which is expected to grow at a rate of 17.7% in that period. Okay, so on to the applications now. So drones are used for various applications, which we'll just give you a brief list. For example, search and rescue, geomagnetic surveys, forest fires, aerial photography, law enforcement, fishery patrols, weather monitoring, scientific surveys, mining, delivery, asset inspections, even air taxi now. They've started UAV racing now. So yes, it's just growing by the day and the list is ongoing, which is a great thing. So we'll just quickly have a look at a video just so that we can visually see the different types of applications for some of these drones. here we go. So yes, different types of applications, different drones will obviously determine the applications that we can use for them as well. And now we're just going to have a look at some payloads. So payloads that can be added onto these drones, so for example, cameras, forward-looking infrared, radiation detectors, thermal imaging, electromagnetic probes, and then we've got some specific scientific testing devices. Next one, okay, then we've got the LiDAR and we've got pesticide and fertilizer. So just to go back with the laser imaging, distance and ranging. So what that basically does is it will be sensors that uses light energy that's emitted from a laser, which will then scan the ground and then measure distances, which will then be used for modeling, creating 3D models, used for maps, etc. So that's quite a big one. And then, of course, just the pesticide liquid fertilizer for crop spraying, which will then be tanks that are then put onto those specific drones. Okay, so to move on to the risk assessment. So just a quick one there. Okay, so what we'll have a look at with determining the risks involved with drones is just a brief summary of what to have a look at. For example, you'll have a look at what type of UAV it is. Is it mature? Is it first generation? Is it still in the testing phase? Because that will obviously also affect the type of risk that we're going to be looking at. The loss ratios, which we can usually have a look at and get from the manufacturers. So that's also very important, because what we have also seen is there has been some cases where drones have had manufacturing problems, which have been rectified. So that is important, because some drones will then have a higher loss ratio than others, especially if they are still in the testing phases. And then just jurisdiction. So with respect to regulatory oversight and licensing, some laws are much stricter than others. So just to determine which area are these drones going to operate in, what are the country's laws with regards to drones, etc. And then again, the role or application, like what we've seen from those videos. What are these drones going to be used for? Is it going to be used for firefighting? Is it just going to be used just for photography, videography? That's also going to determine, obviously, how big of a risk that specific drone is going to be. And then also training and oversight of operators. Have they received training from reputable training organizations? Do they do regular training and competency? And then, okay, to the next one, okay, and then maintenance as well. So are there sufficient maintenance programs in place? And just, is the maintenance up to date? Is it always up to standard? And yeah, we'll go on to the next one. And then the background of the insured, just a little bit of background. What is the background with drones? How do they, again, train their operators, their loss ratios, etc. Okay, and we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, and then we've got risk assessment importance. So over here, we're just going to have a look at why is risk assessment important. So firstly, it's very important for the development of appropriate products. It's very important for brokers to advise the clients appropriately for comparison of competing prices of products, like we've seen with the different types of drones, different sizes. I mean, some DJI drones are, let's say, approximately 35,000, for example, that DJI Mavic 2 Pro that we saw. And then other drones like the Transition Fixed Wing Vtol drone is actually now selling for 2.2 million. So just having a look at the different types of products, obviously price comparisons, again, loss ratio comparisons, all of that. And then just a clear understanding of risk insured. So the insurer from the insurer and the insured. And then it's also essential in the calculation of premium. For example, if you are obviously going to insure a drone that's going to be used for firefighting, there's going to be a higher risk involved because you are going to be in that danger scenario. Whereas if you are just using a drone for videography, photography, the risks are much lower, and especially the area in which you are going to be operating as well will obviously as well be essential in that. Okay, and then so calculating risk. So again, these are just a few questions that we'll ask is who's the operator, what do they do, what type of UAV is it, Is it reliable? What is the reliability? Again, is it first generation? Is it still in testing phase? How mature is it? And then just the wheres as well. So is it low risk or high risk areas? For example, if we have an insured that's operating close to controlled airspace, that might be a high risk area, because even though the drones do have software that will prevent them from going into restricted airspace, as we have seen, sometimes software does malfunction, and there can obviously be a risk involved in that. And then as well, we'll look at why. So why is the drone being used? For what is it being used? Just the application again. And then how is it being used as well? So for the risk types of operations, and then we just have a look at all of that. So that is just a few things on how the risks be calculated. Okay, so then just to go on to part 101, just very briefly, with regards to UAVs. So the SACAA is one of the strictest countries when it comes to UAV operations, which is a very good thing. So let's just quickly have a look at what they basically say. So just a quick one, if we just go back with regards to commercial operations, the CAA just states in part 101, it says no remotely piloted aircraft. Just go back one second, sorry. Okay, so shall be operated within the Republic of South Africa unless such RPA has been issued with a certificate of registration by the director. So that's very important for the commercial drones. And then if we go on to the next slide, we've just got a little table here. So SACAA have classified the drone usages into 4 main sectors, which would be the commercial, the corporate, non-profit, and private sectors. So then we've got just a table to show what you would need according to SACAA if you are going to be operating within those different sectors. So for example, if you're operating commercially, you will need an air service license, a remote operator certificate, an ROC, an all-pass letter of approval. You'll need remote pilot licenses and certificates of registration. Whereas, say, for example, if you are operating under non-profit, you would not need an air service license, but you would need the rest. And then private, you wouldn't need any of those. Okay, so that's quite a nice table. And then, okay, so just to have a look at acceptable uses of RPAS according to SACAA. So they say here for private use, the RPAS may only be used for an individual's personal and private purposes where there is no commercial outcome, interest, or gain. So that is also very important to obviously determine for what the UAV is going to be used for. And then the pilots must observe all statutory requirements relating to liability, privacy, and any other laws enforced by any other authorities. That is also very important. And then for all other uses, where it says again, an RPA must be registered and may only be operated in terms of Part 101 of the South African Civil Aviation Regulations. Okay, so if we have a look at this, which is also quite important, is just to understand the dangers of negligence operations of an RPA. Again, this comes straight out of Part 101 of SACAA. So the dangers definitely would be, you can easily, there could be collision with other aircraft, possible fatal results, injuries to the public, like we've seen some of those drones are absolutely massive. So if something goes wrong, it poses a serious risk. Again, damage to people's property, and then legal liability for breaking laws, such as privacy bylaws, which has also become a very important thing. So you cannot just use drones and, to spy on people and all of that, which we do not want. So then Part 101 again, so unless approved by the SACAA, which is also very important, is to not fly or operate RPAS or UAVs near manned aircraft. Well, we will see a brief video about that in the next slide. Okay, so near manned aircraft, 10 kilometers or closer to an aerodrome, weighing more than 7 kilograms in controlled airspace, in restricted airspace, and then in prohibited airspace. So again, if we have a look at the risks involved, like I mentioned, even though the drones do have software to prevent them from going into those airspaces, accidents still do happen. And that is why it pose a higher risk for insured if they're operating close to controlled airspace, restricted airspace, prohibited airspace. And now we will just quickly have a look at a video of why that is and what the dangers are if drones were to go into controlled airspace. Okay, second.
With hundreds of thousands of personal UAVs currently in public hands, the question of will a serious drone strike on an aircraft occur is no longer a matter of if, but when in the minds of many experts. While tests on bird strikes have been conducted for decades, what kind of damage a drone would cause was still virtually unknown until now. Researchers at the University of Dayton Research Institute are no strangers to airframe impact testing, and they recently partnered with Sinclair College National UAS Training and Certification Center to determine what could happen to a general aviation aircraft if it hit a recreational drone in midair.
We wanted to demonstrate what the hazards are, or the risks, or potential risks are with a drone strike on an aircraft. There's very little data out there to help people understand what happens. So there has been other types of this type of drone testing, but it's been individual components. So they've tested batteries, motors, cameras, and launched them into panels, but not actual aircraft structures.
This test was to see what would happen if an entire drone struck the leading edge of an airplane wing.
So the drone we use for this type of testing is a DJI Phantom 2, and that's a very popular drone out for hobbyists.
It was loaded into the university's Impact Physics Lab's compressed air cannon, which would fire it at the wing of a Mooney M20 at a speed of 238 miles per hour, a speed that approximates the closing speed between the two aircraft.
The drone did not shatter apart. It completely penetrated and it was buried inside the wing. You can see a hole in the leading edge here. The main spar is dented. There's several fasteners that are pulled from the spar from the wing skin. There's some stringers that are bent. There's also some tubing inside that was also bent. So there was a substantial amount of damage to the wing.
While Poorman believes the aircraft would have survived the impact, he also believes that for a faster aircraft, the results could have been worse.
Yeah, if this was a business jet that was traveling twice as fast as what we tested, there would have been substantially more damage to the spar, or could have penetrated a fuel cell, because the energy goes up with the square of the velocity.
Poorman has performed simulated bird strike testing for nearly 30 years, and he tested to see what damage a similar sized bird might cause under the same conditions.
To compare the impact of the drone strike to an actual bird strike, we did a simulated bird using a gelatin projectile that had the same weight and it was approximately the same speed. The bird actually just crushed the leading edge and didn't do any internal damage. As the drone population increases, the likelihood of these kinds of events is going to also increase. In my opinion, what we need to do is look at more how the drones are constructed and perhaps make them more frangible and act more like birds do when they impact and they break apart. And I think that's the key for minimizing the risks for these kinds of incidents.
In the meantime, Poorman cautions hobbyists to understand the potential for hazardous impacts and to be more aware of the risks when they take to the sky. For AIN TV, I'm Kurt Epstein.
Okay, so on to another question. So from that video, we can see obviously why it would be such a major thing if a drone was to collide with an aircraft. Like we can see, it would cause substantial amount of damage to the aircraft and to the drone as well. Okay, so competition time again, just a quick one. So at what speed was the impact test on the aircraft conducted? Okay, so any questions, answers? Let's take it from there. Okay. Well, okay. Let's go on to the next one. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now we're just going to move on quickly to UAV accidents, incidents, common causes. So just from a loss adjusting point of view, what we have also seen, which are common causes. And from what we can see, pilot error is a big one. So that would be incorrect judgment of distances between UAVs and obstacles. For example, not judging correctly the distance between the drone and power lines or buildings, you know, those types of obstacles. And then as well, selecting the incorrect flight mode for a specific phase of flight, which we have also seen that. And then not following the correct procedures in an emergency as stated in the user manuals and what the operators have also received in training, and then forgetting to complete pre-flight checks. Okay, and then also a common one would be bird strikes, which we're also seeing more of those, specifically with hawks. They do really like to attack the drones in the sky, so that is also a very common cause. And then if we just go on to the next one, we've got loss of signal or connectivity, sudden losses of battery power, pitch fall instabilities during landings, hard landings, failed takeoffs, and then equipment malfunction as well. And then just go on to the next one. Thanks, Seku. Okay, so over here is just a quick example of what it would look like if a bird strike was to occur and a bird does actually attack the drone. So just one thing to note as well, so if you actually have a look at the damage that would be caused to the drone if a bird strike was to occur, you would usually see some type of claw marks. There might be a little bit of feathers in there, so that would also be a key factor from which you could see, was it actually a bird strike? Was there something else that did go wrong during the flight? Okay, so then the next one, it's just a simple example of what damage would look like if the drone was to have a hard landing. So not that badly damaged, however, there are some components that are still damaged. And then we'll go on to the next one. So this drone crashed quite significantly, so you can see that there was major overall damage to this drone. Okay. On to the next one. Okay, and then competition time again. The three main sectors of the iTOO commercial drone policies cover what? Okay, thanks, Margaret. Okay. All right, Seku.
Thank you, Laura. So feel free to jump in whenever you can. Unfortunately, I'm sharing screen, so I can't, the only thing I can see is the presentation, so I can't see if there's any hands up or any questions. We'll address the questions towards the end. We just want to go through a few case scenarios, and Laura and Dita, you can just jump in and say what you have seen when assessing certain types of scenarios or certain types of claims. The first one we'll consider is a case scenario which entailed a bird strike. Here we had an insured that was conducting aerial mapping at a mine, approximately about 500 meters away, then a hawk detected. Whilst we humans are embracing the change of having drones, it seems like the hawks are having a hard time. And then the question would be, what are the risk mitigations to that? Is there anything that an operator can do, or is there anything as an ROC that they can do? What we've seen on our side, and this is just basically from a few cases that we've seen where it was a bird strike. These things happened quickly, and most of the time they're just unavoidable because it happens so quickly. So it's not as if when you see a bird then you can try run away with the drone. No, it happens at a split second. And therefore it's important to do what would be pre-flight checks, or things that you just check before you take off. The surrounding area that I'm at, is it an open field or is it full of trees? Because most of the time these birds are actually territorial. So before taking your flight, you just check your surroundings. If you can see that already there is a lot of birds, then it might not be advisable to do that. However, this is left to the prerogative of the operator who will be doing that mission. But now the question is, how would the iTOO policy respond to a bird strike? So we would cover an incident under section 1 of the policy for physical damage when a bird strike happens. But now the question is, how do we know that the bird strike actually happened, because we were not there? So how do you validate and verify the claim? Lara pointed out, for example, when doing the physical assessment of the drone, you can find claw marks, feathers inside. However, in the absence of that, each drone has what is called flight data or flight logs, which is sort of like the black box of the drone. So it records all information. It records the location, the time, and every mechanical and electrical thing that was happening inside the drone. And you get something like what you can see in front of your screen, which is quite small. This is only half of the spreadsheet, but we are able to get these flight data information and then assess them in order to determine whether really there was a flight or a bird strike. So it's not like a case where you can have a witness statement from the bird saying, I was flying northwest and I hit, or the drone jumped in front of me. No. So we have these flight data that can assist us to tell us, yes, there was in fact something that happened whilst it's in the air. So for example, on a bird strike, we'll look for certain messaging that would also even pop up to the controller of the operator. It would say, would also try to correlate that with the version of events of the operator, but also at the same time, the flight logs will tell us when that message occurred. Where was the drone? Was it in mid-air? How high was it? And it gives a range of information. So it gives us the who, the what, and the why. And then
Zeko, sorry, it should also just be noted that in the case of bird strike, sometimes the drone's missing. You can't recover the drone because the bird literally flew off with it, or we don't know where it crashed in a remote area. So that makes this flight data imperative, because it's sometimes the only thing that you've got to actually assess the claim with. You can't do a physical because the drone's missing.
Yes, that is true. So sometimes, in most cases, the bulk of the data is kept on a SD drive on the actual drone. However, sometimes controllers, especially if you're going to use maybe a smartphone or tablet and attach it to it, it does keep a certain amount of data on there, and would be able then to send it to a repairer, a qualified repairer, who would then be able to retrieve that information from there. Let's go to the next one. Competition time. First answer, correct answer wins. What's the most common cause of huge damage? I suppose if you are listening, you would know the answer for that, but the answer is also on the next slide. These competitions, you will win a book if you are the first one to answer correctly. Right. Scenario 2, pilot error and negligence, which we have seen as being the most reason for type of claims. And what we'll do here in these two cases that I'm going to explain, we're going to try to explain two cases where one pilot error would be covered by the policy and a second one where it wouldn't be covered. So in the first case, the insured or the operator was conducting an aerial photography shoot. This was through a narrow corridor, and that was between the roof and the building. And then it got caught in the cables. Due to that misjudgment, it fell, it crashed, and it needed to be repaired. Our policy would respond to this. However, I'm just going to play a video of a second case, and after watching this video, I'll explain why there would be no coverage for this case. It is a silent video, there's no audio on it, but I just want you to look at what happens. So again, this is also an aerial photography shoot. Oops. Right. So that final part was actually a tree, which the operator obviously didn't see because they were more than 500 meters away. So the CAA regulations, in which the policy or the iTOO policy is built around also with that in mind, makes provisions for people to get certain types of licensing. One type, or the more common type, is a visual line of sight, and the second one, which allows you to operate at night more than 500 meters away, is called a beyond visual line of sight. In this case, if the operator had only a license that allowed him to do in visual line of sight, we could then look at where and this is using the flight logs, where the crash happened and where he was at the point where he was controlling the drone. If it was more than 500 meters, we would not cover that because that is in breach, or that operation is in breach of the CAA regulations. The CAA regulations also do make a concession that if you have a second person, like an observer, who can stand about 500 meters away, then you can operate an extra 500 meters away. But you have to be linked by radio. And this is just because you can't see what's happening 500 meters away. It's difficult. And if you're not if you don't have the experience of operating beyond visual line of sight, where you use the screen in front of you to do everything, then our policy unfortunately would not be covered, or would not cover this instance. Just to go one slide back, what are the risk mitigations that can be taken? As we've explained, have an observer or a spotter. If any of you have watched David Attenborough's series on Our Planet, on the behind the scenes version of it, there was one point where they were showing a shoot of a killer whale and its young, on how they were able to do that shoot. They were using drones. However, you had two operators. You had an operator who operated the camera specifically to get the perfect shot, and then you had an operator who operated the drone. And it's the same when using a helicopter. The guy driving the helicopter or controlling the helicopter doesn't do the shoot. You have a specific person who does that shoot and camera. And this is just good practice of having a second person to do and focus on that shoot. So most of the time when we find claims where there is a pilot error because they went into something which is a stationary object, it's normally because he's trying to do two jobs at once. Control the drone, but also try to get the best shot for the visuals from that. And another thing that they could do also is switch on obstacle avoidance, which is part of the system. It's there for a reason to be used. Sometimes this option is switched off because operators feel it limits them in some way. However, this is a safety feature that needs to be implemented so to limit or mitigate any risks of such happening. Anything to add, Dita, on that, on what you've seen on pilot error or negligence?
Just one question I actually want to ask you, because I know you've got extended visual line of sight. That's when you put a second person 500 meters away. Will the policy respond if they used extended line of sight and he had a visual line of sight license?
Yes, the policy would respond. So what the policy does, it doesn't limit. So it doesn't put it as how it would be put in the regulations word for word. What it does say is that if you're operating within the limitations and the regulations of the CAA, then you wouldn't be in breach of any policy condition that's on the policy. So if in this case, for example, he had an extended or an observer or a spotter, which then extended that visual line of sight of his, then the policy would respond to that. But if he operates further than that 500 meters and he doesn't have a visual line, then he's operating dangerously, basically, and in breach of the CAA regulation. Yeah. Hope that answers it. No, doesn't answer it. Yes, no. Okay, I take it it's a yes. Scenario 3 is a failure of equipment. In this case, what had happened was that the drone's battery, when it went to its last waypoint, it had 30%, dropped to 27, and then dead. And that just caused the drone to fall. Upon investigation and a physical view of the actual drone, it was seen that the terminals were actually burnt, which meant that those batteries actually had a high current and which resulted. So what you'd see on the flight logs to confirm if it was a battery failure, for example, in this case, is that because there's no power, those logs are just going to end mid-air. There'll be no more information because it uses electricity to record everything. But once those logs just go dead mid-air, because you can see the altitude and so forth, then it would mean that something went wrong with the power. Obviously, we'd have to check whether was the battery failure the primary problem or just a secondary problem. And it's just, again, good housekeeping. Make sure, so your batteries have what is called a lifetime or span. You can only use it for so long. So if you follow the manufacturer's guidelines, make sure that will sort of help you to make sure that the batteries that you're using are in good condition and have not gone over the time that they're supposed to. So in this case, unfortunately, the policy would not respond to a claim where a battery was the primary cause of the failure, because again, there's a specific exclusion for any unit that has a whole life. When it fails, the policy will not respond because that is a unit in the drone that needs to be maintained and kept up to standard. Then the last scenario, I'm just conscious of time, would be signal loss. In this case, it was a DJI Inspire 2. So about 1 minute into the flight, there was a strong wireless interference and then it just dropped dead. But what was the problem? Again, using the flight logs, we were able to see. So this is just a visual using Google Earth Pro. And you'll see the green line is when everything was still well. And the drone actually lifted up at a certain point, and from that red dot, you'll see then it starts going down. What happened in this case was that those Hilbert towers, these are communication towers which send frequencies and signals, and somehow this signal from that tower was so strong that it cut off the communication from the controller to the drone. And after that, he could not control it, and that's why it came crashing down. So this tower, interestingly enough, was a whole kilometer away, but it was able to do that much damage. Again, how would we know what happened? We have flight logs, there's programs that can assist us, and it gives us that information that we need. In such cases, there's very few risk mitigations that you can take, especially because you wouldn't know, we can't see these signals or frequencies. However, normally the drone will tell you in advance, but in this case, it just, as you will see from this log, it just gave him the notification that there was a a strong signal, you need to fly cautiously. And then below that, it says downlink restored. That means he lost signal for 17 seconds. And 17 seconds, by the end of 17 seconds, that drone was already on the floor. So there's very few risk mitigations that you can do here because things happen also very quickly. But in most cases, when it comes to pilot error, there's a lot that the insured can do. Thank you for listening. And any questions, any comments from anyone? I do know we have just one more book to give away. And this will be determined by Tove and Fergie. I can't see who was most interactive on the group or on the chat.
Thank you, Zeko. Before we get to the last book, there's one last question. Well, that Fia posted on the chat. I'm seriously trying to find it. So
I've got it covered.
Fia wanted to ask, sorry, thanks, got it. If the drone is carrying a substance and subsequently crashes and that causes a pollution spill, would that be covered, or how would the policy respond?
Yes, a very interesting question, which Greg and Kopan are supposed to answer, but I'll give a little bit of insight on. So at the moment, our liability section only covers bodily injury or damage to property. So if you have, let's say, for example, the drone had some sort of cargo, crashed into a fence, damaged the fence, then we would cover rebuilding that fence and the liability to that. However, if this, let's take this into an agricultural perspective, you are being contracted to spray for the season certain fields, and you use the wrong chemical and then those seeds die, the policy wouldn't respond. You'd have to seek a chemical liability for that, but currently our policy does not cover that. So I hope that answers just those two different situations there.
So another maybe additional section from me, I see we've got Chrisanne on the call. I don't know if she'd like to answer. Would the Enviro policy respond in that situation?
Tobe, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
I just wanted to add on to what Zex has just said, but he's 100% correct about what the current policy doesn't cover in terms of the chemical liability. However, we now have a chemical liability extension which we offer for this very scenario, and we're seeing a great uptake in the crop spraying application from commercial operators, and there's a great need for this as the agri sector is exploding. And the adoption of the technology in crop spraying is really, you know, as I say, exploding across the industry. We are finding, and our partners in the RI side are finding that across, you know, the rest of the world, this chemical liability extension is actually very well sought after. So there is this opportunity to add this onto the policy, but it is an extension. And when we get the proper form, Kapana can just review it on that basis, and then we can add the extension on because, you know, correctly, as Zek says, we don't offer it currently in the standalone policy as it is.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, Ferguson, your time. You're on mute.
Tequila.
Hey, I actually planned the tequila. There is another 2 or 3 questions I'd like to ask. I don't know if we can go through them before we kind of announce the winners.
Quickly, we are 2 minutes over time.
Okay, so there's one from Ernst that just asked why the FPV drones are more prone to crashes.
I'm not sure if Dieter would know why, but so FPV drones are ones which it's front view. So basically, it's like you put in large sunglasses and then you control it from there. That means all you can see is what the camera lens is showing you. You can't see surroundings, which would make it difficult for you to see anything that is external that has now come into the environment. And that's why there could be more cases with that. However, in terms of, again, you'd need to, if you have the proper training, then you'd be able to do it better. So it also goes with the experience one would have with those.
Okay, thanks for that answer, Nhlanzeko. The next one is from Daniel. Maybe just, I don't know if you did do this, but just to elaborate on the DVLOS and that the ROC has permission for the SACAA for the distance they can fly.
Yes, so again,
yeah.
The ROC, which is the company that does the operation, would need to have it as a company, but also the actual operator would need to have it. So if the actual operator is only trained to do vision line of sight, regardless of whether the company has actually gotten the approval from the CAA, that operator who will be doing that operation didn't get the approval. He's not licensed, and therefore he wouldn't be able to do that operation.
Okay, awesome. And then just the last one from Barry. He just wants to find out if there is a clear obstruction between the pilot and the drone, obscuring the pilot vision within the 500 meters. Would the policy respond?
The policy would respond. This is why we go back to the main problem or the main reason for accidents is pilot negligence. When you get to the area which you're supposed to do your operation, the first thing you need to see, you know where you're going to be operating. You first need to see, can I see everywhere I'm going? So yes, the policy would respond to cover it, but it's not something that we encourage. We encourage the operator rather to first do their checks properly, do a site inspection before anything, and then take it from there. That would limit and that would mitigate the risk by a whole lot, just doing those few things. And maybe just a secondary comment to that, because there's no automated system as yet, maybe that's where we see the reluctance from the operators to do these checks before. If there was an automated system where instead of going through pages and pages of documents just to get your flight going, if they had that system, it would sort of assist them to get things going and do the proper checks.
And perhaps, Ferguson, maybe just to add to the response there is that we also apply an extra deductible or excess in that case where there is negligence on the pilot's behalf, you know, and obviously we discourage that behavior, but the policy will respond, but there will be a penalty applied in effect.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Greg and Nhlanzeko.